The night was quiet, the kind of eerie stillness that only came when the city was sleeping. Jackson Cole sat in his small Detroit home, finishing off a bottle of cheap whiskey. Another long day, another fight to keep his world from crumbling. His canine partner Shadow lay at his feet, his ears twitching every now and then, listening to sounds Jackson couldn't hear. Shadow was more than a dog. He was a brother, a soldier, a guardian. He had saved Jackson's life too many times to count. Now he was just a reminder of a world that had turned its back on them both. The police department had cut their funding, leaving them both discarded like trash after years of service. Now Jackson fixed cars during the day and fought to keep his daughter Maya out of trouble at night. She was all he had left. And then, the moment that changed everything. Shadow's ears perked up, then a growl, low, deep. A sound Jackson hadn't heard in years, but one he knew too well. A warning, a death sentence for anyone who didn't belong. Jackson sat up, his fingers instinctively reaching for the pistol in his nightstand, and then he heard it. The unmistakable creak of a floorboard. Someone was inside. Jackson moved without a sound, his training kicking in. Shadow was already at the door, muscles tense, waiting for the command. Jackson slid into the hallway, his breath steady, his heartbeat slow. He had hunted men before. He knew what fear smelled like. He rounded the corner, just in time to see the first shadow move. A man, masked, armed, and then another and another. A gang. They weren't here for money. They weren't here at random. They were here for something specific. Jackson's stomach dropped. And then, the gold watch. Sitting on the mantel, glinting in the dim light. His grandfather's watch. The last thing left of a man who had disappeared decades ago. The lead intruder grabbed it, shoving it into his pocket. Jackson didn't hesitate. He raised the gun, but he was too late. One of them saw him. Gunfire erupted. The first bullet missed by inches, shattering the picture frame beside him. Jackson dove behind the couch, firing twice. One shot clipped the leader's shoulder. Shadow exploded forward. The black blur of fury and teeth crashed into the nearest intruder, dragging him to the ground. The man screamed, his gun clattering to the floor as Shadow tore into him. Jackson rolled forward, kicking the gun away, but the leader was already on him. A fist to the ribs, a second hit to the face. Pain flared, his vision flickering red. Jackson struggled, his body twisting, his knees slamming into the man's gut. For a moment he thought he had the upper hand. Then, a gun barrel pressed against his temple. Shadow saw it before Jackson did. The dog's snarl turned into a full-on war cry. He lunged at the man holding Jackson at gunpoint, his teeth sinking deep into the intruder's wrist. The gun went off, and everything exploded into chaos. Jackson threw his weight forward, knocking the man off balance. They crashed into the coffee table, glass shattering beneath them. Shadow was still fighting, his jaws locked around the man's forearm, blood dripping onto the floor. And then, a sound that stopped Jackson's heart. A gunshot. Shadow yelped. Jackson turned just in time to see the second intruder lowering his smoking gun. Shadow stumbled, then collapsed. Jackson screamed. It was a sound of pure rage, of agony, of something breaking deep inside him. He grabbed the nearest lamp and smashed it into the shooter's face. The man staggered back, blood streaming from his nose. The gang's leader, clutching his wounded arm, shouted, "Move now!" And then they ran. Jackson stumbled to his feet, pain forgotten, but it was too late. The front door slammed shut, tires screeched, the gang was gone. And Shadow wasn't moving. Jackson fell to his knees beside Shadow. The dog's breathing was shallow, his body trembling. Jackson's hands shook as he pressed against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "Hold on, boy," he whispered. "You're gonna be okay." Shadow looked at him, his dark eyes filled with something Jackson refused to name. Not yet. Not yet. Jackson grabbed his phone, dialing 911. The call that would change everything. Because what happened next wasn't just a robbery, wasn't just a break-in, it was a message. And Jackson was about to learn that the people who took the watch didn't just want money. They wanted power, and they had just declared war on the wrong man. What happens when the law doesn't protect you? When justice is just a word, and the people who swore to serve and protect serve only themselves? The sirens screamed through the night. Jackson sat on his front porch, hands covered in Shadow's blood. His canine partner lay in the back of his truck, barely breathing. He had wrapped a towel around Shadow's wound, pressing hard, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. The gang had gotten away with the watch, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst was knowing that the system wouldn't do a damn thing to help him. The first officer stepped out of the squad car, lazy and slow like he had all the time in the world. Detective Alan Briggs. Jackson knew the type. A man who never worked too hard, never stuck his neck out. He looked at Jackson, then at Shadow, then at the shattered remains of the front door. Then, he smirked. "Looks like someone got in over their head," he muttered, flipping through his notepad. Jackson's rage burned through his veins like acid. "They shot my dog. They stole my grandfather's watch. And you're standing here cracking jokes?" Briggs didn't even blink. "You got insurance?" Jackson's jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. "This wasn't some random break-in," he growled. "They knew what they were looking for. They came for the watch." Briggs shrugged. "Probably some junkies, pawn it off for drug money." Jackson shook his head. "No, they knew what they wanted, and one of them said something about a key." Briggs raised a hand. "Look, Cole, you're not a cop anymore. You're just another guy living in a bad neighborhood. You want real help? Move somewhere safer." Jackson stared at him, his pulse hammering against his skull. "So you're not going to do anything?" Briggs sighed, closing his notebook. "I'll file a report. We'll be in touch." He turned back toward his squad car. Jackson felt his controls snap. "You think I don't know how this works? You're not going to do a damn thing." Briggs paused. Then he grinned. "You're catching on quick." Jackson's fists curled at his sides. If the cops wouldn't help him, he'd handle this the only way he knew how. On his own. Jackson drove like a madman to the emergency vet clinic, his tires screeching as he pulled into the parking lot. He carried Shadow inside, blood soaking through his clothes. The vet tech took one look at them and shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir, but he's a working K-9. He was shot in the line of duty. You have to help him." She glanced at the dog. Shadow's breathing was shallow, his eyes barely open. She hesitated. Then she checked the system. "Sir," she said softly, "he's not active duty anymore. Your insurance won't cover him." Jackson's heart stopped. "What?" She swallowed. "I can give you the cost estimate for surgery, but without coverage. Just do it." Her expression tightened. "It's $12,000 up front." $12,000. Jackson felt like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. "Are you kidding me? He's dying. Just help him." "I'm sorry, sir. That's the policy." Shadow whimpered. His body was going cold. Jackson fell to his knees beside him. "Stay with me, boy," he whispered. Shadow blinked slowly. The vet tech looked away. "I'll give you a moment." Then she walked out. And Jackson? Jackson stayed there, holding his best friend as he died. By the time Jackson walked out of that clinic, he was a different man. He had lost everything. His home had been violated. His dog, his only real family, was dead. And the police? The people who were supposed to help? They had let it happen. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed. For the rich, for the powerful, for the ones who decided who lived and who died. But Jackson wasn't done. Not by a long shot. He drove home in silence, parked the truck, and stepped inside. The house still smelled like blood and gunpowder. The broken glass crunched under his boots. Jackson walked to the closet, reached up, and pulled down the old footlocker. Inside, his past waited for him. A black tactical vest, a hunting knife, and a 1911 pistol that had seen more war than most men. He strapped the vest on, his fingers moving with calm precision. He holstered the pistol, then grabbed the photo of Shadow off the mantel. His voice was cold, flat. They wanted a war? They got one. Then Jackson walked out the door, ready to hunt. They killed his dog. They stole his past. Now he's coming for them. And this time, he won't be the one bleeding. The night was colder now. Or maybe it just felt that way. Jackson walked through the streets of Detroit like a ghost, his hands tight around the steering wheel of his truck, his eyes scanning the city with the focus of a predator. He had one goal: find the men who killed Shadow. Make them pay. And if the police wouldn't do it, then he'd do it himself. Jackson wasn't just any man. He was a hunter, a tracker. He had spent years in the military learning how to read the world like a map. Every footprint, every scent, every tiny piece of evidence, it all told a story. And tonight, the story led him to the slums on the east side. Shadow had bit one of the intruders, which meant he left blood behind. Jackson followed the trail to an alleyway behind a liquor store. And that's when he saw it. A discarded hoodie. dark, blood-stained. Jackson picked it up, bringing it close to his nose. Sweat, gunpowder, and fear. He knew the scent of fear. It smelled like a man who realized too late that he had made the worst mistake of his life. Jackson smiled. He was getting close. The trail led to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where men vanished and were never found. Jackson parked his truck a block away and moved in silent as death. The warehouse was lit by a few flickering floodlights, and outside he saw 3 men, armed, relaxed, laughing. They thought they were safe. Jackson knew better. He crept closer, keeping to the shadows, listening. Then he heard it. Inside, men were talking, and one voice froze his blood. Langston, the gang leader, the man who shot Shadow. Jackson's fists curled so tight his nails bit into his palms. He was right here. This was it. Jackson moved with silent efficiency. He slipped through a side entrance, sticking to the rafters above, looking down at the men below. It was a full operation. Weapons, drugs, and a table in the center, where his grandfather's watch lay under a bright lamp. Langston stood nearby, inspecting it. "Boss says it's the real deal," one of the men muttered. Langston smirked. "Of course it is. You think I'd go through all this trouble if it wasn't?" The second man hesitated. "You really think Crane's gonna pay that much for it?" Jackson froze. Crane. Victor Crane. A billionaire. A corporate kingpin. What the hell did a man like that want with his grandfather's watch? Langston chuckled. Man like Crane doesn't just want money, he wants power. And this watch, it's the key to that power. Jackson's heart slammed against his ribs. A key. Shadow hadn't died over gold. He had died over something much, much bigger. Jackson's blood ran cold. And then, he made a choice. No more waiting. No more hiding. He was going to burn this place to the ground. Jackson dropped down fast and silent. The first guard never saw him coming. A quick twist of the neck, silent, instant. The second man turned just in time to see Jackson's fist smash into his throat. He collapsed, gasping. The third guard reached for his gun. Bang. Jackson shot him in the knee. The man screamed, collapsing onto the concrete. Silence rippled through the warehouse. Then, chaos. Men scrambled for weapons. Langston grabbed the watch. "Get him!" Jackson moved. Bullets ripped through the air. Jackson rolled behind a stack of crates, firing back in controlled bursts. 2 men went down. The others scattered. Langston was running. Jackson ran after him. A fist fight. A struggle. A brutal, bloody brawl. Langston was fast, but Jackson was angry, and rage always wins. A knee to the ribs, a punch to the jaw. Langston stumbled, blood streaming from his mouth. Jackson grabbed him by the collar. "You killed my dog." Langston spat blood. "Yeah," he sneered, "and I'd do it again." Jackson saw red. He grabbed Langston's wrist, the one holding the watch, and snapped it like a twig. Langston screamed. The watch clattered to the ground. And Jackson? Jackson pulled the trigger. One shot, right between the eyes. Langston collapsed, dead. Jackson grabbed the watch, but there was no time to breathe. More gang members flooded in, too many. He sprinted for the exit, bullets shredding the walls around him. Outside, an SUV roared to life. Victor Crane's men, coming to clean up. Jackson jumped into his truck, tires screeching as he tore out of there. Gunfire followed him into the night, but he wasn't dead, and neither was the fight. Jackson gripped the wheel, panting. The watch was in his hands now. The secret Langston had died for. The secret Crane was willing to kill for. And as Jackson looked at the blood on his hands, he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Killing the gang leader was just the start. Now, Jackson isn't just a man with a grudge. He's a problem for the most powerful man in the city. And when a billionaire decides you need to disappear, you only have 2 choices. Run or fight. Jackson drove through the city like a man being hunted. Because he was. The watch sat in his lap, heavy with secrets. The blood on his hands was still warm. Langston was dead, but Victor Crane was still out there. And now, Crane's men would be coming for him. Jackson pulled over in an empty parking lot, his hands shaking as he examined the watch. It was old, worn. But beneath the scratches and scuffs there was something more. A marking on the back, a series of numbers, a code. Jackson's mind raced. Langston had called this watch the key. The key to what? And why the hell was a billionaire arms dealer willing to kill for it? Jackson took out his phone. He had one contact left who could help him. In a dingy apartment above a pawn shop, Milo Vance was already waiting. The hacker was young, twitchy, and paranoid as hell, but he was also the best in the city. "You have any idea what you just stole?" Milo asked, eyes darting between the watch and his screen. Jackson leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "That's what I'm here to find out." Milo pulled up a classified government file, and Jackson's blood ran cold. "This isn't just a watch," Milo said. "It's a cipher, a key to a hidden database of classified military projects." Jackson stared. "My grandfather was an inventor," he muttered. "He disappeared when I was a kid. No one ever found out why." Milo spun the laptop around. "Maybe because he was working on this." Jackson's heart stopped. On the screen was a blueprint for something called Project Eden, a prototype for wireless energy transmission. The kind of technology that could change the world, or be weaponized beyond imagination. Jackson's hands tightened into fists. His grandfather had created something worth billions, and now Victor Crane wanted to sell it to the highest bidder. "You just made yourself a big problem, man," Milo muttered. Jackson exhaled slowly. "Good." Milo was still talking, still clicking through files, and that's when Jackson heard it. The silence. A second ago, there had been the buzz of an old neon sign outside. Now, nothing. Jackson moved fast. He grabbed Milo by the collar and threw them both behind the couch just as the first bullet tore through the window. Bang! The laptop exploded into sparks. Another shot. Another. Jackson rolled, grabbed his gun, and fired back. Outside, footsteps pounded up the stairs. Jackson grabbed Milo. "We need to go. Now." Milo nodded, face pale with terror. "Back exit." Jackson kicked open the door just as a masked gunman came through. A fight. A struggle. Jackson slammed the guy's head into the wall. Another one came. Milo stabbed him in the leg with a screwdriver. Jackson didn't stop to be impressed. They bolted down the alley, and the moment they hit the street, a black SUV screeched around the corner. The back doors flew open. Gunmen raised their rifles. Milo screamed. Jackson shoved him down. Bang, bang, bang. Glass shattered. Bullets ripped through the street. Jackson grabbed Milo and hauled him toward his truck. They dove in. Jackson floored it. Tires screeched. The SUV gave chase. This wasn't just a hit squad. This was Crane's private army. And they weren't here to scare him. They were here to wipe him off the map. The SUV rammed into them. Jackson swerved, barely missing a streetlight. Gunfire tore through the back windshield. Milo screamed. "This is insane!" "Shut up and reload my gun," Jackson growled. Milo fumbled for the extra mag, shaking. Jackson took a sharp right, tires screeching. The SUV followed. Jackson saw the bridge up ahead. A dead end, unless... Jackson shifted gears. "Hold on." Milo's eyes widened. Wait, what are you?" Jackson hit the gas. The truck rocketed forward, straight toward the edge. The SUV was right behind them. And then, Jackson jerked the wheel and yanked the emergency brake. The truck spun, sliding sideways. The SUV was going too fast, too late. It launched off the bridge, a moment of silence. Then, the sickening crunch of metal hitting concrete below. Milo sat there gasping. Jackson took the gun from him. "Next time, load faster." Jackson parked in an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Milo was still shaking. "You need to disappear," Jackson said. "Now, get out of the city. Change your name." Milo hesitated. "What about you?" Jackson turned, staring at the watch in his hand. "Me?" he exhaled. "I'm gonna end this." Milo swallowed. "Dude, Crane isn't just a billionaire. He owns politicians, cops, judges. You go after him, and you're a dead man." Jackson smiled, slow and cold. "Then I better make my first move count." Victor Crane owns everything. The police, the politicians, the system itself. But there's one thing he doesn't own, Jackson Cole. And tonight, Jackson isn't just coming for revenge, he's coming to end it all. Jackson had one night to prepare, one shot. Because after tonight, he either took Crane down, or he didn't walk away. The billionaire had layers of protection, private security, corrupt cops, political allies. But he also had weaknesses. Jackson wasn't going to fight Crane's army. He was going to burn his empire to the ground. The Crane Global Tower loomed over the city, a glass and steel monument to power. From the outside, it was untouchable. But Jackson wasn't coming through the front door. He had Milo's intel, and more importantly, he had nothing left to lose. Jackson moved like a ghost, through the parking garage, past the security cameras. Inside, the lobby was crawling with armed men. Jackson took the air vents, like a predator slipping into its prey's den. He dropped down onto the 43rd floor, Crane's private office. And that's when he heard the voice. "Good evening, Mr. Cole." Jackson froze. Crane's face flickered onto every screen in the room, calm, smiling, like he had been expecting him. "You've made quite the mess, Jackson," Crane's voice echoed through the speakers. Jackson's fingers tightened around his gun. "You killed my dog," he growled. Crane chuckled. "Ah, yes, the animal. Tell me, did it hurt? Watching it bleed out in your arms?" Jackson saw red. He raised his gun. Bang! The room erupted in gunfire. The walls shattered as Crane's men stormed in, a fight Jackson had no chance of winning. Bullets ripped through the air. Jackson dove for cover, rolling behind a desk. He fired back. 2 down, 3, but they just kept coming. And then, smoke. Everywhere. A grenade rolled across the floor. Jackson barely had time to move. The explosion tore the room apart. The last thing he saw was Crane's smirking face on the screen. Then, darkness. Jackson woke up chained to a chair. A warehouse. Cold. Dimly lit. And across from him, Victor Crane himself. The billionaire was calm, polished. A man who had never lost a war. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Crane said, pouring himself a drink. Jackson spat blood. "You know how this ends, right?" Crane laughed. "You think you're the first man to come after me? I don't lose, Mr. Cole. I buy people. I erase people. I own people." Jackson just grinned, bloody and bruised. "Not me." Crane's smile flickered, just for a second, and then the alarms blared. Crane's guards turned toward the sound. Confusion. Chaos. Then, gunfire. Jackson's backup had arrived, because while Crane thought he was in control, Jackson had set the real trap. Milo had leaked everything. The government files, the illegal auctions, the murders. And now, Crane's own men were turning on him. Jackson tore free of his restraints. He lunged, grabbing Crane by the throat. The billionaire gasped, struggling. "You think money can save you?" Jackson snarled. Crane gurgled. "You don't control the world anymore." Jackson slammed him against the desk. The watch, the one thing this was all about, sat between them. Crane reached for it. Jackson stopped him and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit Crane in the chest. He staggered back, fell. The once untouchable billionaire, dead on the floor of his own empire. Outside, the sirens screamed. Jackson grabbed the watch, and then he walked away. The next morning, the news broke. Crane was dead, his empire gone. The truth exposed. But Jackson, he disappeared. Because men like him don't get medals. They don't get justice. They just keep fighting. Somewhere in another city, in another war, Jackson Cole was already preparing for the next battle. Because the fight for justice never ends. Justice wasn't given, it was taken. And now Jackson Cole walks alone. But some wars never truly end. The wind was cold as Jackson stood at the edge of the old bridge, staring down at the river below. Detroit stretched behind him, a city that had betrayed him, a city he had saved despite itself. Victor Crane was dead. The corruption that protected him, exposed, crumbling. The watch, gone. Jackson had made sure of that, dumping it where no one would ever find it. The technology would never fall into the hands of another man like Crane. But justice? Justice never really existed. And Jackson knew the fight wasn't over. Not really. Somewhere far away in a government office, files were being shredded, names erased, secrets buried. Because men like Crane didn't work alone. And men like Jackson, they weren't supposed to survive. But he had. And that meant the game wasn't over. Not yet. Jackson walked back to his truck, opened the passenger door, and stared at the empty seat. Shadow should have been there, but he wasn't. Jackson let out a slow breath. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single K9 tag, worn and scratched. He placed it on the seat. A final goodbye, a promise. "They'll never forget you, boy. I'll make sure of that." And then, he drove away.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.